Welcome back. The hashtag on Twitter is Newscompass, and we'll be talking in the next 35 minutes or so to Ndungu Wainaina, the Executive Director, International Center for Policy and Conflict, ICPC. Of course, we do cherish your contributions. The hashtag on Twitter is Newscompass. I do appreciate your time. Good evening. Thank you for coming.
Thanks.
I'm happy that you are here.
Great.
Well, it's all about what we have been talking about, and equally made a lion's share of the president's speech earlier at the Nyayo National Stadium. But what needs to happen is that President Uhuru Kenyatta, in 3 years' time, wants results. He has to win this and win big. Will he?
Well, I think I think we should go back to what ails this country. And I think that the beginning point of this country is, one, we have refused to cut the umbilical cord with our colonial state.
Okay.
The state that that was built on criminality, violence, dispossession, injustice, all manner of things. That is the state we inherited. The worst thing is our first government in place is the one that actually cemented that our post-colonial state remained as the colonial state. And the worst thing is today, as you correctly pointed out on your news item, that when Uhuru Kenyatta is talking about conflict of interest, the first conflict of interest was actually engineered and legalized by his father.
That is Kenyatta Senior.
Yes. And he did that with deliberate reason, in that there was an element of attempt to take over the colonial land and other property that the white settlers were living. And then a scheme was hatched on how Africans who had lost land, they could be compensated.
Yes.
Those who had lost property, they could be compensated. Either you get back your land, or a scheme came up on how to buy the former white settlers' land and resettle people. There were also so many other properties, a lot of wealth. What happened is that a systematic thing was done that created a loophole.
Okay.
Actually, that is where the beginning of what Kenyans keep referring to as the Degwa Commission. The actual thing was, Degwa Commission was only came up to regularize and legalize what has already been ongoing.
Okay.
So the beginning point was that very pinnacle of things. That's the foundation in which we find ourselves.
Okay.
Which technically means that, and this is how we ended up with specific individuals in this country owning all the tract of lands you see today. Well, at the same time, you have masses of communities who are dispossessed land and they don't have it. So, which means, the point I'm trying to make here is this. We began it at the very foundation. The question is, will he undo what his father began? Okay.
Now, given that, when you mention the critical element here, where all these problems stem from, is the foundation here,
yes,
which is equally key, and it's the central problem, is the central point, which is the conundrum here that we keep on talking about. Now, the son and the father seem to be facing the same problems. 56 years ago, Kenyatta faced the same problems, mutiny at the Lanet military barracks, until the intervention of the British, who at the time left in the country. 56 years later, still the son is still facing similar problems, but in contemporary 2019. When he says the war on graft, there's issue here about that I want to bring out. The likability and the trust deficiency. Kenyans are holding their noses. What do we want our convictions?
But the point is this.
So how do we reconcile all these then?
The beginning point of this is this. You see, now, if you have that foundation of you govern a country by deceit, by dishonesty, by abusing the office, abusing the power you have, because that's essentially what the beginning point of that was.
Okay.
Technically, what that meant, we fundamentally compromised what we always term as good governance from the word go. That essentially threw out the rule of law. So impunity and corruption became the defining foundations of this country, right? When Kenyans struggled through that process, they went along with the Jomo, then Moi came. Moi even made it even worse. In fact, the Moi's principle, or the Moi's philosophy of Nyayo was essentially that.
What Kenyatta left.
Yes, I knew what Kenyatta was doing. I know what he was What was his philosophy? His philosophy was purely corruption and impunity. People could steal, people could do a manner of things, people got murdered, people got killed, they walked away with. If we look at Moi's legacy, it's the same. Look at Kibaki. Kibaki tried to open up a space, but Kibaki had only a space of 6 months when he got to power in 2003 to make a fundamental change. And unfortunately, 2 years down the road, Kibaki completely forgot that he had a mandate from people. Kibaki is the only president who was overwhelmingly elected by people of Kenyans in a fair, open, transparent election. So he had the mandate to cut out that. And unfortunately, he found himself going back to where Kenyatta was and where Moi was. And it's not by default. Remember, Kibaki had served both governments all along. So he knew what the procedure was. So we have been walking along that path. So the real thing here is this, and this is what Kenyans did, and this is something that I keep wondering why we keep struggling, and the question you are now asking me fundamentally. After Kenyans suffering for all those years, they decided to come up with a social contract. This constitution 2010. This constitution is not by accident. Perhaps this is the only constitution, maybe perhaps after South Africa, which is very, very detailed. The reason is Kenyans were very bitter about their history being ostracized by the state defranchising them, state depossessing them, state not serving the interest of public good, but state serving the interest of a private individual. What we have been having historically in this country from 1963, when we gained self-rule, because that's what we call Mandaraka, and then we became a republic when in 1964, what we are celebrating today, is this country suffers from a deep entrenched state capture. So the question is Uhuru Kenyatta ready to confront state capture head on? If we can, then he will win.
Okay. Is he then?
The question is, and this is what he's suffering from. First, Uhuru has come to power on two occasions, which are very contentious. Both of them have a fundamental problem.
2013-17.
Yes, both of them have been faced with one clear centerpiece, and which even in 2017, the Supreme Court nullified. How do we address electoral fraud in this country, electoral impunity in this country? And that is why Uhuru Kenyatta will face a lot of problems. He is trying to talk, and he has been trying to persuade Raila Odinga to try. What Uhuru is trying to buy from Raila Odinga is political legitimacy. He doesn't have it. And I can tell you this for free. This is the second time Raila Odinga is coming to salvation of a politician who claims to be in the State House and exercising power. Raila Odinga came to salvage Mwai Kibaki at one point. So the question is, if Uhuru Kenyatta doesn't have that political legitimacy, then how do you expect him to confront head-on state capture? Okay,
given that, when it comes to the legitimacy aspect here, at some point NASA in 2017 said there was no legitimacy of the president until the handshake happened and there was some sort of political bromance between Kenyatta and Odinga. In that regard, then,
the problem is
in that regard, do we have then, let me just finish the question, a corrupt system where Odinga and Kenyatta are members that doesn't either fancy addressing the economic and the political problems bedeviling the Kenyan people?
In fact, one of the things I was expecting today, and to be honest, I'm very, very disturbed and disappointed that a country can be suffering under enormous economic crisis and a serious physical problem, but a president cannot even utter a word about it, because that's the reality.
Yes.
And that's a fundamental question. And two is this. If the state itself is rotten to the core, how do you expect itself to rehabilitate itself? For instance, and I want to be very practical here, it is on public domain. Some of the biggest beneficiaries of government tenders and actually has come out openly in government reports is how Kenyatta family members have benefited from different government agencies. Is it? And they have been exposed to a lot of corruption in it. Can he confront them?
My question then comes here because
that's the point.
That general, let me just pause it.
And it also raises the question,
okay,
how, when Kenya, there's something I want you to understand about this. There's a reason why Kenyans put so many provisions in the Constitution that for the first, and I want to keep telling Kenyans this, the problem we have is not the Constitution. This country has a serious leadership problem, leadership that is not ready to adhere and follow the rule of law and constitution. It's as simple as that.
Okay, let me come to that because it's 9 years since we promulgated these documents we are having here on the 27th of August 2010. When you have mentioned the aspect about the interest of the first family in the government agencies, we have heard multi-billion scandal at the Ministry of Health.
Precisely.
Seems there has been no attention from the investigative agencies.
On it.
And when you look at the likes of Governor Mike Sonko, who have been arrested in that dramatic fashion, then the question of the Integrity and Ethics Commission is questioned here with regards to the selective amnesia and the selective treatment of those who are allegedly corrupt. So how do we address this problem?
And now, let me give you an answer. In 1999, Thabo Mbeki faced, no, 1989, Thabo Mbeki faced a problem.
Yes, in South Africa.
In South Africa. He came to a deep conclusion that South Africa was being eaten internally by people, cabinet ministers, senior government officials, sitting right at the heart of the cabinet. So they were the key decision makers. So the question became, the institutions that were created by the South African Constitution, which are largely we borrowed from, had already been compromised, but they were being compromised from internally. The key people who are making decisions.
Independent state institutions.
Yes, and that's the problem we are having here.
Okay.
Kenyans created it. Let me tell you, and Kenyans need to know this. If there is an institution with all the powers it needs constitutionally, it's EACC. If there's all IBC has all the constitutional powers to address matters of elections. The National Police Service was completely detached from politics and civil service, but they have been trying to circumvent. So the point, what Thabo Mbeki did, is he did one thing. He said, I am going to create an independent, what he called the Special Operations Crime Unit, which is popularly known as Scorpions. This is the agency. He said, yes, it is going to operate, but it is going to operate within the framework of the prosecutorial authority, but it's going to operate independently. He completely sealed it from civil bureaucracy interference, from the normal South African Police Service interference, from all that. And then the good thing about it is that this institution had what you call the best practice tripartite of combining intelligence, crime investigators, prosecutors, all together in one. So it was self-contained. The good thing about it is this. It investigated everybody. It is what led to the collapse and finally the sacking of one Jacob Zuma,
who is still facing corruption charges.
And already all the cases he has tried, he has tried to, even now we have moved from prosecuting him to now South Africa is having what we call the State Capture Commission of Inquiry. So that tells you something. If we adhere to the institutions, if Uhuru Kenyatta want to succeed on corruption, one thing I want to advise him is this. Can you allow and ensure the institutions that were created by this constitution operate fully independent, the way they were insulated, the way they are protected, don't interfere with them. And let me give you how do those institutions come about. We need to look at the structural element of how those institutions are built. Is it in conformation with the Constitution? Is their operations in conformity with the Constitution? Is the process of funding them independent? Because that's essentially the point. Let me ask you a simple question. How comes, up to today, National Police Service Commission does not have its own National Police Service Fund? Independent financing. It is one condition.
Which is part of one of the reports that were, to look into it, ignored until even the Americans and the British expressed concern in a leaked WikiLeaks report. I mean, that was after the post-election violence of 2007. Still, there seems to be no such progress. But again, in terms of the painted picture generally and the blanket sense of where we have gone wrong, in 1987, when we established the Kenya Anti-Corruption Authority, and one of the major, of course, mega corruption scandal was the Golden Bag under Toritish Arap Moi's regime, which costed 10% of the country's GDP. And Amos Wako, the then Attorney General, is the one who blocked the prosecution of state officials who have been implicated until the pressure from donors and the international community. In 2019, we seem to have a micromanaged, more or less, and an executive pressure, exogenous pressure on the independent institutions that you have mentioned. We have a troubled past and we seem to be incapacitating ourselves. How do we break that barrier?
And that is the point. You see, this constitution says, for instance, that the National Police Service is independent of the political executive and the civil service. So why is National Police Service still being controlled from State House and Office of the President? The reason why Kenyans created National Police Service Commission is to create a buffer institution, right? That they have even crippled the National Police Service Commission itself. They determine how to appoint the commissioners, right? They even determine how to appoint different heads of different police service, other than a clear merit-based process that has been set here. So how do you expect an institution that is set independently in the Constitution, but when it comes to the structural or operational aspect of it, is being controlled outside? Can it deliver?
Of course, when there's micromanagement, a big no.
And that's the problem. That's also the problem with the IBC. It's the problem with the EACC. It's a problem of all these institutions. We are dealing with a problem we are running away from. The problem in this country is not the Constitution. Let me tell you, and I have read the BBI. Okay. In fact, the BBI report, I read it that night it was released. I can tell you this: the people who wrote that document arrived to the fact that our problem is not lack of laws or institutions. We have two major problems. One, lack of enforcement of laws. Two, weakening institutions and laws to purvey individual interests. So a conflict of interest arises, undue influence. And this is what I said. The centerpiece of corruption and impunity in this country is now essentially when you start manipulating public institutions, public laws, public policies for purpose of self-gain. That is the problem we are having.
Okay, you mentioned an equally important point that we can't miss out from this equation, the judiciary.
Yes.
It's a crucial part of the criminal justice system. The CJ wasn't present today, and in a previous presser he said he will choose which state functions to attend, perhaps decrying the judicial cut or the slash of its budget. Yet again, we see an arm of the government, an entire arm of the government, facing capital deficiency. Yet we have the EACC and the DCI and the DPP arresting people, wanting the same courts and the judiciary to make convictions. We seem not to be addressing the particular problem here, isn't it?
Yes. Let me tell you this. You can keep bashing judiciary. Judiciary has its own serious problems, internal. And this is about the internal accountability. What you call judicial accountability is lacking in the Kenya judicial system. It's an internal thing.
How about the external pressure?
Now, that is one aspect. The second aspect is this. If you start interfere, one of the cardinal principles of judiciary is the custodian of the constitutionalism and rule of law in a country. If you don't have an independent judiciary that people can trust, then the country will forever remain in morass, in crisis, in conflicts, because you do not have an independent arbiter of disputes. Now, so we have that problem. The judiciary is the net effect of when you cut money for judiciary. You are there is a reason why there was created the judicial fund, to create financial independence of judiciary. You cannot pass a budget of parliament, then unconstitutionally withdraw out that budget. But let me tell you something, and this is something that Kenyans need to know. In any given case, you win a case or lose a case at the investigatory level. How is the protocol of correcting evidence? What sort of evidence? How do you correct evidence? How do you manage the evidence? Then from there, by the time the investigatory arm is presenting a case to the prosecutor, because the prosecutor's work is to assess the type of crime you have, the connecting it with evidence, and then you build your case. Now, the problem is this. In Kenya, there is an assumption that you take a case to judiciary, but nobody is telling you what sort of investigations that went into it. Do you think Jacob Zuma would be prosecuted if the Scorpions never conducted a thorough internal investigation?
The threshold here.
The threshold.
Yes.
And that's why, personally, I have written a lot about this subject, because I'm very passionate about having a critical working criminal justice system, because it's key to this country. The point I'm making is, if we need to give the DCI, the Directorate of Criminal Investigation, a full independence, and you don't need to amend the Constitution. The National Police Service is given a constitutional independence.
Okay.
What you need to do is to differentiate between the DCI as a national law enforcement agency that must be provided with the three things. It must build its capacities on investigations, on crime intelligence correction, it must have internal prosecutors inside it, so that whenever they are preparing any case, it is, by the time they are forwarding that case to the DPP, it's complete. And then finally, they need to get an internal backup of even intelligence people. So that in itself makes self-contained. And then we need to completely delink it from the day-to-day law and other things. Let that be handled by the regular police and all those other guys. Then we need to start asking ourselves, is keeping the structure of the police the way it is really viable? Right? What is the connection, what is the relationship between the prosecutor and the investigators? There is a reason why Kenyans separated the two. It is to make sure there is a balance and check, and making sure that there is no any arm of either. You know, remember we used to have the police as prosecutors.
Yes.
Kenyans, there was a fundamental problem of compromise of cases.
All right.
Yes.
You have mentioned a very critical issue, but again, we have a sort of the food chain here. That is the judiciary, the endpoint, and starting off with the Graft, that is the investigative agency, the DCI, hands over to the EACC, to the DPP, and then who in turn calls for the arrest before the matter is heard and determined by a court of law. In that chain then, definitely what appears to be the weak point is the judiciary here. One, they are decrying funds. Two, they are often antagonized until the CJ had to say that bring us substantial cases we can rule upon, and that seems to be absence in court of law. Take, for instance, the case of Peter Mangeti, the former PS at the Ministry of Devolution. All the 23 acquitted in NYS Season 1, and we have big names facing corruption. Rotation Company, we have Sonko and the two other governors, Samburu and Waititu of Kiambu County, who equally are facing similar charges of swindling cash at the county level. How do we bridge all these differences then, if we are to have what you said is a strong and independent criminal justice system? Because that is key,
it is key.
to the moving forward of this country, and it's lacking, apparently.
The most critical thing is this. A judicial officer will determine a case based on evidence and law. And for that to happen, a judge will depend with the prosecution. What sort of a case is the prosecutor has brought? The prosecutor will depend with the investigator. Right? So we need to have an honest conversation how that chain works. EACC is part of this system. Because EACC, is the Constitution demarcated very specifically. It will be the one responsible for issues of economic crime and corruption. So it has to do that investigation, forensic investigations, build the cases, then build the cases and provide the files to the prosecutor. So there is no conflict of interest between the DCI and EACC, because the EACC has a very particular mandate.
Okay.
It is economic crime and corruption. So what it is we should be asking is the EACC doing forensic investigations in building its corruption cases? Now, the problem we are having is where you want, the executive want to order judiciary to do things with outcomes that you are not following a due process. Because also you don't want to make court become a theater of persecution. You want them to remain a center of arbitration and adjudication. So that's one aspect. So for me, the most critical thing is this. If Uhuru Kenyatta wants to win the war on crime, he has to do two things. One, he has to sit down and ask the question, how do I build a credible, effective, and efficient Directorate of Criminal Investigation that delivers results? Two, how do I strengthen the capacity and the competencies of EACC? Then, once this has answered, then the question he needs to answer is, how is the DPP? I am very happy to note the DPP has actually been trying very much. I think when I look at the chain of prosecution, the DPP is one space that has really shown a massive improvement. I also think DCI has really also upped its game.
All right.
But I think for me, judiciary must be allowed to be given sufficient resources. Two, they must be allowed to operate as per this constitution, independent without interference. And then we must also allow, so that if you want to succeed, don't interfere in the recruitment process of people who are heading the police, DCI, ECC, and DPP.
Okay.
Let it be done transparently the way it is put here.
Okay, thank you. Because it envisions a lot, one of the most admired, transparent, and elaborate constitution admired globally across the world. On that
Which you
note,
have refused to implement.
of course, not even more than 50% of it.
Yes.
Well, we hit the break on Ndungu Wainaina. When we come back, we'll continue with the discussion. Look at the political end, because we have a corrupt political system that is equally sick and healthy and needs to be remedied. But the problem is how to undo that damage. Our starting point will be 1964. Kadu, of course, the differences of Tom Mboya and Oginga Odinga before all things went wayward ever since then into 2019 contemporary Kenya. The hashtag on Twitter is Newscompass. I'll sample some of your feedback after the short break here on the program. Stay tuned. Thank you. Welcome back. You're watching the program into the final segment, possibly of 2019. And we sampled some of your feedback coming in. 82% of Kenyans were born after 1963. Don't remind them of mistakes of the white colonialists. They cannot relate. Tell them about the greed of the black colonialists who have led them since 1963, and they'll understand why they are poor, hungry, and jobless. That is Mama Mboga on Twitter. And we have still this person, Tony Kagia, says, the BBI will punish you more than it will punish me. You will be crying for Kenyans to go out to the street to remove the Prime Minister. I promise you, mark my word. 56 years after independence, tribalism, corruption, bad governance, unemployment, impunity, public looters. That's according to Ahmed Mohammed on Twitter. And Kwangu Nyumbani says, it's been real. Thank you for the great shows of 2019. Newscompass is the hashtag. And he continues, it's another day when those causing Kenya its problems gather in all the same podium, lie to fellow Kenyans again. Happy 56th birthday, Kenya, my crying country. And this is Francis Rungu, thank you. 2019 Newscompass, asante sana, we do also thank you. And final one here, because there are many. Daser says, 55 years after independence, still President Kenyatta is fighting what his father Jomo Kenyatta fought in 1963. Affordable housing, food security, affordable healthcare. Kenya is at standstill. Hope the BBI will solve all these issues. Keep them coming. We do appreciate, of course, your feedback and keeping us company here on the program. Let's now unpack the political element.
Yes.
Well, there has been the real sort of the scramble for attention, influence, and the grip with which any person wanted to control the politics of the country.
Yeah.
Tom Mboya's faction-led KANU and Oginga Odinga's faction-led KANU. In 2019, we still seem to be having those who are opposed to the DP, William Ruto, and those who are in support of his quest, calling for the implementation of the 2013 accord between the two gentlemen, who at the time are brought together partially, maybe by the shared indictments at the ICC of crimes against humanity. When you look at that and you reconcile the two happened instances in 1964 and 2019, we seem also to have the political problem here, isn't it? And the antidote appears not in the vicinity for undoing of the damage politically done to this country.
Yes, and that began with where I also began when in this conversation, where Jomo himself was the first person to commit a crime of political dissent and dishonesty. Remember, Jaramogi refused to form a government, despite the fact that Kanu had won, and he had every liberty to form a government. He said, until Kenyatta is out, I'm not going to form that government, right? And the point came in 1965-66 was the turning point. Kenyatta turned against Jaramogi and ostracized them. By the time we were getting to 1969, now he turned to the people who helped him to ostracize Jaramogi. Right? And that went on until Kenyatta left. Moi came in. The people who helped Moi to get to power were the people Moi used in 1983, Muthemba Commission and others, to clean out and wipe out what he considered to be the Kenyatta mafia by that time. Then Kenyatta leaves. Moi leaves. In comes Kibaki. Kibaki comes and he begins with a political settlement agreement of an MOU. 2 years after that, he betrayed that MOU. From this time it was Raila, who was Jabba then he became the Mogoroki and so many other things. Yes, all those names, things, the names and all that kind of thing. Then if you look at that history, we have a history of political deceit and dishonesty as the backbone on how we conduct our politics. Two, is that Kenyan politics is politics of criminalization. Every crook and criminal in this world, whether if you have stolen, you have murdered, you have done anything, the refuge and the safe haven you have is politics. So Kenyan politics has never been about public interest and public good. They have always been. In fact, I have always said this: achieve political power, you achieve economic outcome you want. And that's why politics in Kenya is a cut and throat issue. Then let me address something which BBI is, and Uhuru and Raila, and more so Uhuru has been talking about.
Yes.
There is nothing like lack of inclusivity. This constitution
talks about basically the 10 outline points.
10, all of them. Each one of them is here in this constitution. In fact, for inclusion alone, it talks about inclusion for more than 21 times. It talks about how you do appointment in public service.
Why do you think, in your view, then they had to come together and form a task force? Which is
for me, it is trying to develop two things. One, Kenyatta was desperate to find a political legitimacy, and two, he needed to bridge. He was looking at a point where this country will go down on my hands. I can't allow it to go. And when it goes down on my head, I as Kenyatta will become the first casualty. You see that? So it was about first self-preservation and two, a political legitimacy. It is also what Kibaki did. You remember when we had the PNU?
Yes.
And Raila became the prime minister. The reason why the Kibaki and the PNU wing tried to persuade William Ruto to join them. You remember?
That was after falling out with Odinga. Yes.
They were both
when he served as the Minister for Agriculture.
Yes. The fallout was the PNU had the minority in the House. ODM had the majority.
ODM had 101.
Yes. So essentially, yes. PNU lacked political muscle in the House to move the business. So that's why they had to cut off part of the ODM, align with them. Now, that is what I am telling, and that has been our politics. So if you are talking about political inclusion, what makes it so difficult using the provision of this Constitution and the Elections Act? We are multi-party democracy. What BBI is proposing is actually killing multi-party democracy, while actually strengthening the presidency, which Kenyans refused.
And will be given the power to appoint a prime minister.
Then you can sack the guy. In fact, the BBI has given more power to the presidency other than reducing it. Then two is, how can a president now come to appoint a guy with the majority? It is like in the US today, the way we have the House of Representatives, yes, where you have Nancy Pelosi as the House Speaker. Now, Donald Trump appointing her as the Prime Minister. That is dead. There's no multi-party democracy there. Where is the check and balance? Where is the accountability? Who will provide it? We got to deal with one thing. The political corruption in this country and the political impunity in this country, we got to deal with it. We got to deal with the politics of dissent. And let me say this. There is no problem of political inclusion in this country. What we have refused to do is to do the right thing. Let Raila Odinga, as the leader of minority, go to the House. Either he can decide to go and become the leader in the National Assembly, and his running mate Kalonzo goes to the Senate, or they decide where to go, so that they are able to provide checks and balances. Remember, Nancy Pelosi, in the last, yes, she was the leader of minority in the Congress, and she was able to filibuster and engage with the Republicans. So what is this so unique about ourselves? If Uhuru Kenyatta wants to make this country very inclusive, let him apply this constitution in his appointment to the public service, right? Because it is a clear requirement in under Article 232 of this constitution. Whenever you are doing appointment, there has to be a principle of inclusion, gender equity, and diversity of the face of this country. Is that what Uhuru has done?
Okay.
Because that's the real issue.
Definitely,
so,
of course.
So we should stop chasing shadows and engaging in cat and mouse game. Let's be honest with ourselves. We have a constitution we have refused to implement.
Okay.
It has all the provisions. Two, let us engage in an open, transparent political system.
Okay, given that, just hang on a bit. There seems to be also the questionable aspect here of individualizing the politics of the country. It needed Odinga Kenyatta to come together to settle the political climate at a time when there was uncertainty economically, capital flight and investment fear coming to the country. Why is it then that we seem to be having problems with our political culture, and it had to take Odinga Kenyatta to come together.
Of
course, minus the followership in the country, does it also entail the issue of ethnic balkanization that still dots the political culture?
Two things. One, we have a problem of political institutionalization in this country.
Which, since after multi-party democracy, appears to be a problem.
It has been a big problem. We have never been able to institutionalize the political institutions in this country. If it's about political parties are formed closer to elections. After that, they disappear. Today, you don't know whether Jubilee is there or not. In fact, I have no idea whether even Jubilee exists. ODM exists because Raila Odinga exists. That's a fact. They can deny it, but that's a fact. Look at Wiper. Where is Wiper? Do you hear it? Where is Ford Kenya?
Appears to be divided center-right.
So you don't even know where they are. So if you do not have a properly institutionalized political parties, that's a big problem. You have a problem. The second, and this is the elephant in the room. Can we agree in this country that elections is going to be the only means of transferring power? What does that mean? This constitution devolved elections. Elections in this country are devolved. The principal unit, the final determinant of elections in this country is a polling station, with finality being the constituency tallying center. The problem we have is we must stop computers and counters of votes being determinants of outcomes of elections. We must agree in this country, we must reform the IBC, we must reform how we manage our elections. And we must agree elections is the primary source of transfer of power. That is the problem we are having in this country, and we must sort it out.
Okay, given then in 2022, because there seems to be a bit far away from the logic of the Jubilee Party telling us that they will rule the country until 2032, that is 10-10. They say that on the 10th day of September 2016, when they launched the party flamboyantly at the Moi Sports Center, Kasarani Gymnasium, and the NASA, or the opposition coalition, appears to be oozing political blood, to go by the words of Musalia Mudavadi, who is the brainchild. There seems to be that the two topmost political entities are heading in the wrong directions. 28 years later, we still have the problems that dotted the country before the repeal of Section 2A of the Constitution. A perpetual continuity after 2022?
And that's the point I'm making, that the moment you don't institutionalize political processes in this country, how you conduct the political processes, how you conduct elections in this country, we make elections to look like a warfare. Why? Because state in this country is the only means and ways of being rich. I can tell you this for free. All the billionaires we have here, you can count them.
That's about 8,000 who own as many wealth as
they were either former cabinet ministers or assistant ministers in all the governments since independent. They were all civil servants, particularly the senior ones. They were all senior police officers or security people, and all that. You can cluster them. It is very hard. Ask anybody in this country, tell us how you made your wealth. Show us. Show us if, by the way, all the billionaires you're talking about,
if we were to do an audit,
if they were to tell us this is the investment I made and this is how I made my money, Kenya would be one of the richest countries. Look at all the billionaires in the US. You know how Bill Gates made his money. Everybody knows. You know how Rockefeller made his money. You know all of them. You know how Jeff Bezos has made his money.
But there appears to be questions about Donald Trump
they are very
in terms of taxation.
Yes, they are very clear about that. But the good thing about them is they will tell you, I invested in technology. I invested in labor. They are very clear how they made their money. Tell me and show me, how comes Kenya has all these billionaires, yet Kenya does not seem to have all those massive investment? Where are they?
The questionable aspect, and that's why perhaps at some point we saw the capture of the audit as is recommended by the BBI report. I don't know how honest that can be.
You see, the point, this takes me back to what I told you, and this is what I told your viewers, that this country has a serious problem of state capture. We must be honest with ourselves. State in this country becomes the means and the ways of people getting rich. So you manipulate let me tell you, and I keep saying this, in this country, we do policy formulation, we do planning, we do budgeting for purpose of stealing. You manipulate a policy, you manipulate a plan, you manipulate a budget, you put budget, you have exaggerated budgets, inflated project cost, people make money out of it. So essentially the point here is this, if we are going to say from here moving forward, outside the things I explained, how who can tackle corruption, the other thing that must be done, we must overhaul the entire of policy planning and budgeting processes in this country.
Okay, a good important point. Then one thing that you can't take out of the equation here is all about what we need to do then in the event that we are continuously saying a failure of the political system, because we have been here before.
Yes.
It's not the first time. In 2006, we formed the Committee of Eminent Persons following the divisions of the 2005 Chungwa and Ndizi referendum. It issued a report in 2006. 1 year later, we slided into the post-election violence. Ugly spectre, engulfed the country until the late Kofi Annan and company had to restore some form of sanity that culminated in the formation of the Mkatinusu government of Kibaki and Odinga. There's no assurance and guarantee yet because of the current divisions that the BBI can restore order. My question then, where is the permanent solution here in terms of addressing the political problem? A paradigm shift, hopefully, and that can be driven by the economy in 2022 and a rising number of young people who will be registering as voters by 2022 to see some form of change as the easy, immediate fix for the country.
3 things. 1, the post-colonial state Kenya must accept it is not able to manage a 21st century country. Our politics, our political system does not seem to understand where the world is in 21st century. We are still applying the 20th century politics and political system. That will not work. There is a massive movement of technology, demographics, financial system, and economic system. That's 1. 2, so we must address that. 2, is we need to address ourselves at the heart of the problem is the IEBC and the management of elections in this country.
Okay.
We must address that. Then finally, we must, let me tell you this, and this is my final point.
Yes.
If you look at the entire world, the most successful economies in the world are highly devolved countries. Devolution for economic security is the next frontier for this country. If you devolve power and resources and you move functions, most crucial functions that affect Wajiko every day to the local people, this country will make a massive leap forward on the economy. And one interesting thing I noted today with Kenyatta's speech, he acknowledged the success of devolution in matters of economic progress. He needed to move out there and make devolution his core agenda.
Okay, and that is despite increasing outrage and assertive public of how his government jeopardized at one point the devolved system of governance.
Because if you address those 3 things I have talked about, then this country's move forward.
Okay, Ndungu Wanaina, we end it on that note. An equally good discussion and a good end. I do thank you for coming on board.
Thanks for having me.
Asante sana.
Okay.
So we take a look at the developments in the UK. Polls are set to be closing. They have closed 30 minutes ago. And some of the major issues that were subject to contest included, of course, the Brexit issue. And we can take a look at some of what has been dotting. This is, of course, the elections that are happening in the UK. Of course, pitting Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister, against the Labour Party leader, Jeremy Corbyn. We see results are not yet in, but polls have closed across the major cities in the United Kingdom, where the snap election is taking place. And hopefully by tomorrow morning, the United Kingdom will have a Prime Minister. That's according to the electoral agency in the UK. And this follows, of course, the 2016 referendum in which they voted to leave the EU. That has been the subject matter in that country. And of course, it's equally important that we highlight that here. And it was all about Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister of the Conservative, of the Tories, if you may like, the Lib Dems of Joe Swinson, the Labour Party of Jeremy Corbyn, UKIP, or the United Kingdom Independent Party of Nigel Farage, and the Scottish Nationalist Party of Nicola Sturgeon from Scotland, who fancy a possibly second referendum in the UK following the failed bid some years ago to leave the United Kingdom. They support to stay in the EU as an independent country. The hard border between Ireland and Northern Ireland remains an issue that is yet to be ironed out. All this happened in the UK as the European Union watches events in London, Manchester, Birmingham, Newcastle, watch events in the UK with bated breath. And that is, of course, crucially who the next Prime Minister will be, how he will negotiate the Brexit process, whether he will subject that to a second referendum or directly head to Brussels, where the EU is headquartered, and seek perhaps what they say It's a win-win situation sort of an agreement between the EU and the UK. In the event the UK leaves the EU, and the EU will be a UK-less if that regard it's going to be happening. Therefore, tomorrow all will be set. Then by 31st of January, that will be, of course, January 2020, all will be set as all the matter will be resolved once and for all. I hosted Ndungu Wainaina here tonight. And Newscompass, the final edition 2019 has just happened. We do thank you for your contributions. Of course, we do appreciate your feedback on Twitter on the short SMS code 40920. From the onset 9 p.m. to 10:30 p.m. we have been here for you. And of course, this program will be back on the 9th of January 2020 by the grace of God. But the news will continue, as is the case, as was the tradition, the culture here on the program. I am Ayub Abdikadir Abdi. Our sign anchor tonight has been Joyce Wairemo. Thank you to the prompter operator, that is my good cameraman Wycliffe, to the man behind this camera that I'm facing, Shadrach, to the gentleman behind the gallery, Charles, the director, Esther, of course, AC, one of my favorite person in the company, and of course to the entire team, Derek, the sound man, and to the morning team entirely. We do thank you for making us look good and be good on air. Stay safe, and thank you for tuning. This has been Newscompass. Good night.